Hello. I'm going to explain to you some of the basic principles of agnosticism. Let me start off by sharing a quote of one of the most famous agnostic quotes. This is by Protagoras. He says, "As to gods, I have no way of knowing either that they exist or do not exist, or what they are like." Here's another quote. "I do not consider it an insult, but rather a compliment to be called an agnostic. I do not pretend to know where many ignorant men are sure. That is all agnosticism means." Clarence Darrow. So, agnosticism is basically the idea that the knowledge of God's existence and the nature of a theoretical God, it's just theoretical. You cannot, that knowledge is inaccessible to humans. So agnosticism is just skepticism with an open mind. It's saying, look, I don't know if there's a God or not, but it's possible. I'll admit for the possibility that there is a God, but I'm not going to be certain. I'm not going to claim I'm certain there's no God. Whereas Gnosticism, this is the opposite of agnosticism. Gnosticism is those people who say, I know there's a God. Oh yeah, I know there's not a God. Like theist agnostics would typically say, yeah, I know there's a God, and I know I'm going to be saved. I know I'm going to heaven when I die. I know there's an afterlife. Agnosticism is this claiming of certainty. It's this claiming of certainty of things which you cannot know. And so agnostics are looking at these people like, how do you know that? Do you have superpowers? I don't know. That's how I know that you don't know. It's because you don't have superpowers that enable you access to this knowledge that is inaccessible to humans. How can anyone claim certainty of the existence of gods? It's ridiculous. It's foolish. It's childish. So that's agnosticism in a nutshell. It's just open-mindedness to what's possible and not claiming things you don't know, not pretending to know things. So once you arrive to that conclusion in your life, once you become an agnostic, then you start to explore what's possible. Rather than focusing on what you believe, what's more important to you is what's possible. So as agnostics, we admit that maybe there is a God. Maybe there is. We don't know. So we want to prepare for the possibility that there could be a God that's going to judge us. It's possible. So we want to stack the odds in our favor. And so we live our lives as though we might be judged by a God, regardless if we believe in God or not. Okay? Let me share with you a quote by Christopher Reeve. He said, "Even though I do not personally believe in the Lord, I live as though he were watching." Okay? That's a great idea, is that you don't actually even need to believe in God in order to prepare for the possibility that there might be a judgment on your life, on your behaviors. And that's just something you can do as an agnostic to stack the odds in your favor of possibly improving your odds of living forever. But as agnostics, we don't know, so maybe there's not a God, in which case we want to live forever physically because we don't know there's an afterlife. And that's why we pursue things like life extension. That's why we care about our physical health. Because we want to live forever. And we're not going to risk our eternal life. We're not going to accept death on some assumption. That's what religious people do. You see, religious people, they're okay with the idea of death and dying because they're just assuming that there's an afterlife. But to an agnostic, that is the stupidest thing you could do. Because you don't know there's an afterlife, and you don't know that there's a God to save you. So agnosticism is about hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. The agnostic code is saying, yes, there might be a God that's going to judge me. I'm going to prepare for the worst. And not just any God. Maybe God is extremely wrathful and judgmental and has no forgiveness. So many Christians just assume that God is forgiving because they're trusting what their pastor says, or they're trusting their own interpretation of the Bible or the Quran, or they're trusting that this book is inspired by God and it has God's rules in it, like it's God's infallible rule book. How do you know that? So agnostics, we're going to prepare for the worst case scenario God. That God might be a neurotic perfectionist that requires us to be perfect, practically perfect. We don't know the standard of a theoretical God. So prepare for the worst. And on the flip side, we're going to prepare for the possibility that there's not a God. Because we don't know that. And we want to live forever physically. We're going to be healthy. We're going to treat this body and this life like it's the only one we get. So that is the premise. That is the basics of agnosticism and following the agnostic code. It's for people who treat their eternal life seriously. We're not going to risk our eternal life on some assumption. Our eternal life strategy cannot have holes in it. It has to be calculated and make room for every possibility. So that's it. Follow the agnostic code. Be smart. Don't pretend to know things. All right. Bye. Thank you for watching.